Howdy once again everyone, and today I'm excited to be testing out my first ever Voigtländer lens designed for mirrorless cameras, the Voigtländer 35mm f2 APO Lanthar. It is available for Sony E and Leica M mount cameras. It produces a full frame image, it's a manual focus lens, and it costs $1,150 or about £900 here in the UK. That is a very expensive price for a manual focus 35mm f2, but Voigtländer makes some pretty incredible claims about the lens's high quality, so I can't wait to see what it can do. I'd like to thank Voigtländer's UK distributor for loaning me a copy of this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. I'll be sniffing out both its strengths and its weaknesses. Let's start with its build quality. This lens might have a slightly old-fashioned looking aesthetic design, but it handles like a dream, one of the best quality manual focus lenses I've ever used. It's made of metal throughout, with a beautiful brushed black finish. It has a nice little weight to it without being heavy, and everything about it feels rock solid and built to very tight tolerances. Voigtländer make no mention of weather sealing for this lens, and there's certainly no protective gasket around the rear mount. Something you can see here though are electronic contacts. As I mentioned, this is a manual focus lens, but it does still communicate electronically with your Sony camera, and resultantly has a few useful tricks up its sleeve. Firstly, if your camera has in-body image stabilization, then you won't have to manually set its focal length, because the camera's getting EXIF information here. Secondly, when you turn the manual focus ring, which turns incredibly smoothly and precisely by the way, your camera can recognize that and immediately switch into manual focus assistance, which speeds up the process a little. You can turn that feature off though, if you want to, in the camera's menu. As you can see here, the lens has issues with fairly heavy focus breathing, zooming in as you focus more closely. Thirdly, although the aperture is controlled manually on this lens using a ring at the front with perfectly weighted clicks every third of an f-stop, the camera knows what aperture you're shooting at and will report it back in EXIF information, which is all very elegant to see. Something I'd like to show you here is the unusual shape of the aperture mechanism's 12 iris blades. At certain apertures they produce quite a round circle, and at others the shape is a little jagged, so the lens will offer you a variety of different Bokeh shapes when topped down, and a variety of different sun-star strengths too. The lens comes with a little metal hood which itself, unusually, comes with its own separate lens cap of a different size to the main lens cap. Its filter thread size is 49mm wide. Overall, this is one of the nicest handling little manual focus lenses in the world, really. Not only is the build quality top notch, but the way it electronically cooperates with your cameras is very nice too. Alright then, image quality. I'm testing this thing on a Sony a7R III full frame camera with its full frame 42 megapixel sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At f2, we see excellent sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image, although the image just shies away from being razor sharp. The good news is that, in the corners, we see no reduction in image quality at all. They look spectacular, with tons of detail and contrast, although vignetting is obviously causing some darkening here. As you stop the aperture down stop by stop to f8, the image quality across the whole image frame sees gradual but ultimately pretty minuscule improvements. f11 and f16 see a little softness creeping in due to diffraction. Ultimately though, it is a fantastic performance here. I'll give it a 9.5 out of 10, as I was hoping for just a tiny bit more sharpness in the middle at f2. Let's take a look at vignetting and distortion now. These images are taken with in-camera corrections turned off. The lens projects virtually no distortion at all. However, at f2, the corners look pretty dark, suffering from vignetting as they do. f2.8 and f4 see much more brightness in the image corners, as you can see, but that low distortion characteristic is one thing that's really pleasing to note. Now, let's take a look at close-up image quality. This lens can focus down to 35cm, just averagely close really, and what else is average is the close-up image quality, which gets noticeably softer than at normal distances, although it's still reasonably good. f2.8 looks sharper, and f4 is pretty much perfect again. Now let's see how this lens works against bright light. It's another very good performance here. Contrast remains very high and flaring is mostly under control. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at chroma levels. Even at the brightest aperture of f2, no chroma smearing is visible in the image corners. Excellent. Let's zoom out and look for some sun stars now. In the aperture range from f2 to f8, you don't really see them much, but on my copy of the lens, when I was topped down to f11, well, there they are, pretty strong. Now, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Outer focus areas look gorgeously smooth here, although when shooting at f2, we do come across a slightly stronger cat's eye shape than usual to out of focus highlights in the image corners. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. This lens carries an APO or apochromatic designation, and that designation bears out in real life as we don't really see any colour fringing on the outer focus highlights. Here is f2.8 for those interested. Anyway, overall, I had great expectations of this expensive lens, but thankfully those expectations were pretty much all satisfied, as this is one of the highest quality 35mm lenses out there. It is fantastically sharp, with great contrast, no distortion, no chroma smearing, no chromatic aberration, pleasant bokeh, and top of the range build quality. £900 is a lot of money to pay here for a manual focus optic, but you're certainly getting what you pay for, so it comes highly recommended. Thanks for watching everyone, and what a lens! I love putting all kinds of lenses through their paces so that you can really know what you're paying for. If you find these videos helpful, then do check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description below. Supporters of this channel get all kinds of exclusive bonus content and of course a warm fuzzy feeling inside.